The Bob Murphy Show, episode 381.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews, conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bob Murphy Show. We got another crossover. This is yet another fun one. We have two topics that Adam and I covered in this episode. The first is the news that apparently the powers that be now admit that the most likely explanation for the origin of COVID-19 was a lab leak in Wuhan. So we talk about that. And then the other fun, provocative topic is this whole thought experiment. Hey, if you had a time machine and could go back and kill baby Hitler, would you do it? And Adam and I cover that. So I think you're in for a treat.
Hello there, Bob.
Hello, Adam. Well, I thought I had a gotcha that you didn't. I was going to allege that you needed to change your backdrop, but I see you actually did. So do you want to comment
Look
on
at that? Look at that. This sign used to say "Free Ross" when we were waving it at Donald Trump, telling him he needs to free Ross Ulbricht when he came and spoke at the Libertarian National Convention in May of last year in Washington, D.C. Then my lovely wife went and cut it in half and assembled it, as you see there, saying Ross free, to demonstrate the fact that the man followed through on his promise, and he let that guy who got 2 double life sentences plus 40 years for creating a website in an ultimate travesty of justice, they let that guy out of jail, and I couldn't be happier.
And it went from a imperative statement to a declarative one, I believe.
Something like that.
Yeah, it's very good.
I thought free Ross was okay too, except it went from a demand to like just a description. Look over there, that's free Ross.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But my wife's a stickler, so she cut it in half and reassembled
it. Also, it just reminds me of the interview with a zombie, Ross free.
Yeah, I tend to speak like that when I'm hungry, especially.
Well, the news hook for today, folks, that Adam and I decided upon was the CIA has come out, and turns out, you remember the whole COVID thing? Apparently there was a lab or something in this strange Chinese city that has something to do with it. So it's a novel theory that they're entertaining at this point. And Adam has done more research on this. And so I'm going to hand it over to you, Adam. What can you tell the good folks that maybe just saw some headlines and they didn't bother to go read it?
Well, I want to assure the good folks that I've done the bare minimum of research for this particular show. But I thought it interesting that if you go look at the Wikipedia entry for Wuhan lab leak theory, or however it's described, it still says that's a pure conspiracy theory that only lunatics think. Lunatics like the FBI director, Christopher Wray, who just said that the FBI has for quite some time now assessed that the origins of the pandemic are most likely a potential lab incident, which means he's only, a couple years behind Jon Stewart, who famously said, "You're telling me that the Wuhan lab of virology in the town of Wuhan, where the virus was first discovered in Wuhan, China, you're telling me those things are related?"
Well, what's interesting is, even with that quote, he's saying for some time now. Was that his tune in October if somebody asked him? Would he have said for some time, less 4 months? You understand what I'm getting at?
I do. And if this agent of the government is saying that, it makes me wonder what other agents of the government knew that, which makes me wonder why it was so important for one Joe Biden on his way out of office to pardon Anthony Fauci. Why would he need to do that? Did he know, despite everything he said, that this was something that came out of a lab?
Well, if I recall correctly, the pardon was pretty specific, like limited to a 27-hour period, and saying alleged jaywalking, and saying no, that right?
You would think that a pardon would have to be tied to a specific time and a particular crime, but no, I believe this pardon was open-ended, not tied to any crime, and going back 10 years, I believe.
Yeah, right. I think it was 2014, right?
I
That's how
think
far
so.
back. Yeah. So for folks at home, in case our wit is too much for you, what we're getting at is that, yeah, the pardon that Biden gave to Fauci was open-ended. It wasn't for a particular thing. It was going, had a timetable of going anything he may have done from 2014 to, I guess, the time of the pardon being issued that Anthony Fauci can't be prosecuted for, or, he's given a pardon for, whatever the terminology would be, but open-ended. And so Adam's theory is that, yeah, since now it's coming out and all these organizations, so it's not just the FBI, right? It's also the CIA. Those were the headlines I saw, that CIA admits lab leak hypothesis has credence or something like that.
Yeah, I saw that headline too. And if you remember just how many media elements in this country, mainstream ones, are just saying this is all just kooky right-wing racism. I even saw a transcript of an episode recently by NPR talking about courageous scientists who are promoting the truth of the lab leak theory in the face of, media is trying to keep them quiet. Even NPR is admitting that this thing came out of the Wuhan lab.
Well, here, let me just, while this is on the top of my mind here, remember or remind folks of some of the ping-ponging. When it first, I'm talking January of 2020, when there were reports of, hey, some kind of contagious thing going on in China and whatever. And so it was either January or February. I'm almost positive it was one of those 2 months. There was some kind of Silicon Valley event, industry event, that they either canceled it or they didn't let people from China attend. And that was criticized by leftist progressives as being incredibly racist and anti-scientific. They're just like, oh yeah, you right-wingers, you're germaphobes, and then, anything foreign is going to make me sick, and just overreaction, and why don't you go consult the scientists on that? So that was interesting. And then, of course, early on, the message was, don't use masks if you're the general public. Just, wash your hands and stuff, because, the point is you got to reserve the mask for they didn't say that. If they had said, because we want to reserve the mask for healthcare workers, everyone would have freaked out and worn masks. No, it was, no, that masks don't do anything. You don't need to do it, but don't worry about it. And then only later did it change. And Fauci even admitted, he didn't use the verb lie, but he admitted that, yeah, we knew, we had to tell the public that because we needed to reserve the masks in the early stages because there weren't enough to go around, and we had to reserve them for healthcare workers. So he even admitted down the road that, when people asked him, why did you guys switch your guidance on masks? But also, just to go along with what we're saying here, that there was a period, so after the initial thing, and then when it was, people were wondering, was there a lab leak? And you're right, that was just utter nut job stuff. And then there was a Wall Street Journal expose on it. And I think that came out in early 2021, right? Or was it 2022? I can't remember how long the blackout period was, where it was just utter nut job conspiracy stuff. And then at some point, the Wall Street Journal broke a story. And then all of a sudden, it was literally within 1 week, it became acceptable to say that. So it was still people on the left still saying, oh, come on, that seems like a stretch. But it was now, okay, maybe, but we still think it's unlikely. Whereas literally the week before, you would have been afraid you'd lose your job if you said something like that. Just what a crazy nut. That'd be like saying we didn't go to the moon or something. It was just what a nut job you were, or that AIDS can get transmitted, by sending letters or something.
Yeah, I agree. And it brings up so many questions. I mean, why did they rush to take one side of this particular narrative? Was it just that Trump was the guy who was sort of in the public eye saying, I think this thing came from China, so he must be wrong about everything and a racist? And then the other thought is just how incredibly herd-like we are. The entire population is ready to call you a racist for suggesting the most obvious thing, and then they'll 3 years later just act as if they always knew it, or the memory hole, the whole outrage and the way they treated everybody was entertaining a hypothesis that was totally rational.
Well, I think to make it even more cynical or arguably sinister, I can't prove this, but I believe if I had time, I could go and find that. Well, no, I mean, of course I can do it because it ties into what I just told you, that the right, or sorry, the leftists criticizing the right for trying to like make it this is a China thing. They were actively saying you can't ban flights and stuff like that. And so I think part of it was, well, no, because if the public believes this is a thing about China, then they're just going to say, well, let's just not let people from China come over here, as opposed to let's completely take over U.S. life and, regulate everything and, put arrows down in the Walmart and say how you got to walk. And so do you get what I'm saying? That if Americans thought this is a thing that started in China, there might be, the initial thing might be, well, no, instead of just taking over our lives and having lockdowns, why don't we just cut off international travel as a first step and see how it plays out? And I think maybe the initial panic would have subsided, and it might have been hard to do the 2 weeks. Don't worry, everyone, we'll lift the lockdowns in 2 weeks to flatten the curve. That's my guess, that they needed to push that stuff through. And so that was part of the reason why they had to knock down early on the stuff about maybe it's coming from China, because, they wanted to, otherwise the public could have been shunted onto, well, geez, if it's coming from China, then the thing is just to, cut off flights.
Yeah, that could be. I don't know. They looked to me, if I remember back, I mean, Nancy Pelosi was saying, come on down to Chinatown and shop. This is not a problem. Don't be a racist. I just don't think people were thinking very clearly from these leadership positions. And then they scared the public so bad that we started looking to them to just make up like anti-scientific rules for us to follow, like the 6 feet social distancing rule that Anthony Fauci later just admitted it's not based on any science, not even a weak scientific study. He just said, I think it just sort of appeared one day as if from heaven.
But by the way, I want to clarify, because even now the alternative hypothesis was not that it started in Texas. The alternative, like everyone knew, like it originated or where ground zero was, but the issue was just, was it a leak from a lab in Wuhan, or was it like in the open air markets or something? Was that like the other theory, that some guy just, got it from food that was out in the stall or something? So either way, you could say, well, what did they, but I'm just saying, I think the reaction of Americans, especially with Donald Trump being president, as to how should we deal with this, would have been different if it was, there was a leak in the, Stephen King lab in China, versus it was just a naturally occurring thing. And these things happen.
Yeah, I have two thoughts about that. And one is, it's not original to me, but are you really trying to tell me that the racist idea is that intelligent Chinese scientists were monkeying around with gain of function and accidentally let a dangerous virus loose? Or all the weird things you have to assume about wet markets and pangolins and what Chinese people eat and do? Which one of those strikes you as the racist thing? And then as far as just, the idea that back early in 2020, shutting off travel from China would have helped, I don't know if that was ever plausible, because I remember the scenes of death and despair coming from Italy being pretty quick. And if the thing had already, gone from Asia to Europe, is there any amount of restriction that was reasonable that could have saved the country? I kind of doubt it, especially if the reports are true that a whole bunch of people in this country got a weird kind of sickness that they didn't have a name for, back in November and December.
Again, I just want to make sure, right? I'm not saying like, oh, we should have tried. I'm not doing like the Murphy Great Barrington Declaration Part 2 or something. All I'm saying is, I think since, under the assumption that the plan was, we're going to use this to ram through a bunch of stuff to see how much the American population will endure, that it would have been a distraction if it looked like this was a lab leak. And so that's my modest point, that anyway, but yeah, obviously once the cat was out of the bag, it was getting over the United States no matter what.
Do you have any visibility on the theory that Biden's pardons to people like Fauci can work to actually hurt their case? Because now they can't claim, Fifth Amendment immunity for anything. And so if they got hauled before Congress for any reason, or were involved in some court case, they couldn't plead the Fifth, and then maybe they could be gotten for perjury or something like that. I've heard these theories, but I don't know how much water they hold.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, so the quick answer is I don't know. And I've heard some people like being asked that like I think Tom had Robert Barnes on, and I don't know if he literally asked it, but something along those lines, and like the conversation shifted, right? So I have not seen from somebody who has definite legal background to say whether that is literally true, but I certainly think in terms of the grand scheme and whatever, that it's way more important to me that the public learned, or the public, the portion of the public that cares and is willing to spend 10 hours investigating this stuff, that the truth is, becomes available, as opposed to the 20 most responsible people end up going to prison. Like in the grand scheme, that's not, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, I understand people's desire for justice, but I would much rather it be that everybody knows what the heck happened.
Yeah, I agree. I think
rather than like a bunch of people taking plea deals and then going and serving prison time, and then we don't know what happened actually.
No, I agree with you. I think the clear win is the thing that looks like an admission of guilt. And I don't think any of these people would have ever been prosecuted either anyway. Mm-hmm. And I'm not eager for them to necessarily be prosecuted. I don't have any faith that would happen, because how do you get the people in charge of the justice system that's been weaponized against you to actually investigate itself or anything like that? I think the win we got with these pardons and the optics of it is more than enough.
And even just to go further, so you know what you said, that and I've seen people say that too, that now we got leverage, whereas before they could just plead the fifth and say, well, no, because I might go to prison for this stuff, I don't have to say anything, and you couldn't compel them. But now that element's off the table, you could subpoena them, and and they have to testify, or else be held in contempt or something. So besides that, though, just give it time, and a bunch of these people are going to write books. Just talking about, and they'll of course spin it. Like the context here is just before we did this, I was doing research. I'm probably going to do a Human Action podcast episode on. It wasn't on my radar. Maybe other people are like, yeah, Bob, how did you miss this? But like a year ago, PBS dropped a documentary on Easy Money. And it's like going through, and at first it's like, what? And it's like half of what you would want. Have you heard of it?
No.
Okay, yeah, because I was like, how did I miss this? I mean, it's got over 1 million views and stuff.
Oh, wow.
And the guy went through, and he is interviewing all the right people, like Neil Kashkari and these other people, but they're all being very self-serving about it. You know what I mean? Like all the Fed officials. Yeah, we were just trying to get the banks to lend more, and they just took it and started buying assets with it. And, what could we do? And geez, these greedy bankers, but you know what I mean? So they're all covering their butt and making it sound like this is but they're all talking about what happened, and it's giving more insight into it. Whereas, yeah, if any of them thought, I might be prosecuted for this, they would just keep their mouth shut. So I think, yeah, with here, just giving it time, eventually more and more of these people, just because they're narcissists or whatever, are going to want to talk about, it's people like being at the center of attention.
Indeed.
And so whether it's Fauci himself, you would think he would have the good sense to keep his mouth shut, but he also said he was the science and, all that stuff too. So anyway, I think, yeah, a lot of these people give it some time, and when it dies down a little bit, are going to come forward, and we're going to learn a lot more, because again, they're going to feel the freedom to speak freely, knowing, yeah, this can't end up, boomeranging on me in terms of legal consequences.
It does bring up a point, and again, Tom Woods has said this quite a bit about, we've talked about the science. What about the history? We've seen how weird the history has been over the last, just handful of years, and the narratives that are being promoted by all the keepers of record, so to speak, are just all wrong. And do those things get corrected over time, or how often do they? I'm really curious to see what this looks like in the history books 20 or 30 years from now. I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah, I'm sorry to doubt you, Adam, but I just had to look. Wikipedia, COVID-19 lab leak theory is the subject matter, and the COVID-19 lab leak theory or lab leak hypothesis is the idea, blah, 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 blah. This claim is highly controversial. Most scientists believe the virus spilled into human populations through natural zoonosis and Yeah, I mean, the heck is this?
You keep scrolling and they keep on talking about it being a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, I mean, does this is the article locked? Like how is this possible?
I don't know.
I mean,
I'm not trying to say that Wikipedia is the definitive source of human knowledge, but you'd think it would be a little bit more responsive.
yeah. Well, just not to take this on a huge tangent, but I used to love Wikipedia, and then I don't know, like in the last 3 years or so, it just has seemed incredibly biased, and I'll use it for non-political things, or just, you know, if you want to get going and go try to find some sources on something, but it's I don't like it now as much as I used to. I actually used to contribute to it, and I stopped.
Yeah, for my money, I just view it as a starting place, just to sort of get whatever. It's what the common story is, and then like you look into the sources and start Googling around for contrary opinions and see what you find. And
I
maybe
mean, right, but I feel like even given that's what it was for, more like for something like this to me, this would have been inconceivable 10 years ago, that if major stories break where NPR and the Wall Street Journal and stuff are covering it, several days later, it's still nobody has put that into the article at Wikipedia on this. That's all I'm saying.
The thing I love about our conversations is they go in so many weird directions. When Wikipedia was new, I have to imagine that a lot of people were willing to spend their time curating it and editing it just because it's a brand new thing. And look, I'm part of the official history. Maybe it's worse now just because not that many people care as much anymore.
Or it could be a bias thing that, just like I personally don't, you know, like if it was rightly or wrongly construed as being politically biased, then a bunch of right-winger types left. And so then, yeah, like those would be the ones that would go in and have the incentive to,
right,
you know, fix this article. And so now if those people aren't there, anyway, all I'm saying is there was a lot of people that made sure when I lost an inflation bet to Paul Krugman that even there, I've bought into the narrative. I didn't lose an inflation bet to Paul Krugman. I lost an inflation bet to David Henderson and Brian Kaplan, and Paul Krugman ran a victory lap. So even though it was libertarians or anarchists that won that inflation bet, Krugman was not saying anarchism for the win. He was saying Keynesianism for the win, even though the people who won the bets were not Keynesian. Interesting.
And I'm noticing a big hole in the market you could rush in and fill with a Smurfopedia that 20% more accurate than Wikipedia. You should get on that.
I should. All right.
So
well, go ahead.
I was about to change gears very awkwardly
Okay.
and ask why in the world you've been thinking lately about drowning innocent babies.
Speaking of Fauci, so how did this even? For whatever reason, on Twitter recently, this thing was making the rounds about. Well, if somebody said if you could go back in time and kill, you know, the baby of some famous historical figure, who would it be? And then people were arguing about that. So, you know, obviously the most popular answer, survey says Adolf Hitler, but other people like on my feed, of course, were throwing stuff out, you know, Woodrow Wilson or whoever, Karl Marx, stuff like that. And then I just thought, you know, I think this is worth Adam and me talking about for a few minutes. This whole premise about, you know, using the time machine and going back and killing baby Hitler and whatnot. Like, the more I was thinking about this, the nuttier the whole thing was. And I don't just mean because time machines don't exist as far as we know. So I don't know. Do you want me to start riffing, or what do you want?
I'll put my flag in the ground just to see, just because we haven't talked about this. So we all know the famous question, would you or wouldn't you? And then a whole bunch of ethical considerations spin out, Holocausts and innocent infants and all that. I think the question's kind of silly too, because if you accept the premise that the future is not set and you can go back in time and change it, I think there's all sorts of things you could do to make sure that Hitler didn't rise to power and create the Holocaust other than killing an innocent baby. I think just being a little bit more supportive of a struggling artist's career probably would have done it. Yep. So it's weird that everyone just leaps immediately to murder as the solution.
Right. Okay, great. Yeah. So just on that vein, I had jotted some things too, like you could have been a mentor to the kid, you know, you could have just really just inundated him with all kinds of, you know, great Austrian works and stuff and got him to go down the path of classical liberalism. If you wanted to do something edgy, you could have like seduced his mom before she had him and then like been a homewrecker, if you wanted to be just a bad boy about it, and would it be worth it? So there's all that kind of stuff. But just even, in general, just the butterfly effect. I mean, strictly speaking, if you, did anything, if you change the direction of a stop sign or something, that might alter the course of history, and then he doesn't rise to, or more, you could print out the proof of Fermat's last theorem before you get in the time machine and go back, and then go give it to some mathematician. That would clearly change the path of history.
Indeed,
probably, all sorts of stuff you could do. And like you're saying, Adam, why is it that we pick that? And then also, even in terms of the morality, I think most people would say, well, what if you went back in time and killed Hitler's mom before she got pregnant with him? And I think most people would say, well, no, you can't kill an innocent person. Okay, but the baby's not guilty at that point either. You know what I mean? So there's all that weirdness.
You say that, but the baby's name is still Adolf.
Yeah. So there's that.
How innocent could he be?
Right. And then I was thinking about it, and the whole premise of you going back and being able to change the future means there must be a multiverse, right? So I think you can have models of time travel where there really is just one timeline period, but then you can't obviously change history. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, so it's conceivable if you went back in time and didn't kill yourself or your grandpa or something and didn't do anything, and then it could just be like, oh no, you actually did that all along. Like, you could even go back in time and give the inventor the plans for how to build a time machine, and that could all be consistent if there's one timeline. But you couldn't go back in time and make it so the Holocaust never happened, because for one thing, you wouldn't be born, and that timeline, you are never born with your DNA, so this is not going to happen. So clearly, to avoid a paradox, there must be a multiverse, in which case you going back in time and doing some stuff, and then you going, then you either traveling back with a time machine or just living back there and then getting older and growing up into a different future world. The Holocaust still happens in the other timeline.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's not like you spared anybody. Yeah. It's just like you went upstream and then took a different tributary, and like, it's just where you decide to go on your adventures, as if Doctor Who is carting you around or something. But it's not like you saved anybody's life. But now what you did in terms of your great adventures with the time machine is, what it's like, how it feels to murder a baby.
And
it's like, what the hell? So, you could go hang out with Jack Kerouac, or you could drown a baby. But either way, you're not saving anybody's life.
That's very good analysis as far as multiverses go. The only pushback I would give is I think it's futile to try and make time travel scenarios make sense, because they just don't make sense. My favorite joke on this whole subject, I'm sure it's not, again, new, but can I tell it?
Obviously, we got to take up some time somehow.
Got to take up a little more time. We're only at 26 minutes.
Right, we haven't even had our first commercial break.
Yeah, I'm going to butcher the joke just a little bit, but it's along these same premises. As people are gathered together, they got a time machine. They're going to send a guy back to go kill baby Hitler. So he gets in there, and the machine goes whoosh, off he goes. But something gets screwed up. He goes to the wrong time, the wrong place, and he ends up killing baby Woodrow Wilson. So he does that. He comes back and says, "I'm sorry, guys. It's all messed up. I couldn't kill Hitler. I killed Woodrow Wilson instead." And the response, of course, is, "Who's Hitler?" Because World War I caused World War II. You all get it. It's not a great joke, but it's my favorite joke.
What would be good is if you said "Who's Hitler" in German to imply that because we didn't have the wise Woodrow Wilson, then we got taken over.
Exactly. That's another level I didn't think about.
So another thing I don't like about the whole premise of it is it solidifies the idea that Hitler was this uniquely awful person in history, as opposed to Stalin or whatever. So besides just the creepiness of it and whatever, again, the fact that it's always just axiomatic that, oh, would you go do that for Hitler? And he's just always the go-to, the worst person in history, or you might say Judas of Iscariot or something, but other than that, it's Hitler is always the go-to guy. And, it's, I suppose when I was younger that, I just took that for granted, and it's not like it bothered me like, oh, he gets a bad rep. He's misunderstood. That's not what I'm saying. But it certainly does, serve to underscore the myth, and as we've seen now with recent political events and the freak out people had with Daryl Cooper being on Tucker's show and everything, of how much people just, well, no, I mean, Nazi Germany was bad and the U.S. had to go in. If we didn't have World War II, it's by the way, this is kind of funny. So I recently, Adam, had a Zero Hedge hosted a debate between me and this other guy on MMT versus Austrian Economics. Nathan Tankus was the guy's name.
I saw
and at the end, like, I think I won the debate. All right, I'm just going to say that. And then at the end, I thought I handily beat him just in terms of my arguments, but also I just think I was more prepared. And, Nathan, for whatever reason, I just looked like he was winging it and didn't have his opening remarks prepared. But in any event, so I thought, okay, I got this in the bag. And then right the last thing, the host is giving me a softball. He just kind of matter-of-factly says, Bob, what about, certain things that the U.S. government could do, like World War II, you might not like how they financed it or something, but I mean, the government spending money to go save the world or free the world. And he was asking me about fiscal policy. And I could have just let it go, right? Like, it was not my moral responsibility, but I thought, no, I'm going to alienate half the Zero Hedge audience and say, just for the record, I dispute the claim that the U.S. had to enter World War II to free the world. And that, half of Europe fell to Stalin. We had Korea and the Vietnam Wars after. It's not obvious to me that the U.S. entry into World War II was a good thing for, human liberty or something. And the host was kind of taken aback. I'll even say this, too. The host afterwards, when we were done recording, said, it's funny, Bob, because when you said, well, I know I'm probably going to alienate the people that were with me up till now, I've thought, Bob, what could you possibly say? And then I was like, oh. So anyway, it was, my heart goes out to all of you.
I see what you did there.
Yeah.
I thought it was a great moment. I was surprised you went for it, but then again, I know you, so maybe I shouldn't have been surprised.
Oh, sorry, I forgot the punchline. The punchline was, I thought, how can I ever look Scott Horton in the eye again if I just let this go?
Exactly.
That was the thing.
It brings up an interesting point. I think the human brain, who's not a historian, just kind of has to have simple narratives or they can't hold it in their head. So I get how people just end up walking away with, what do you know about World War II? Adolf Hitler was a unique evil. He murdered a bunch of people for racist reasons, and it was very bloody and destructive. But obviously that's way too simplistic, and I don't know how I feel about it. It's not like I expect my mechanic to know all the details here. And if the average guy can only understand simple narratives, what should the simple narrative be? And I don't have an answer to that. But since you and I are just riffing here, and you mentioned Daryl Cooper, I am very much looking forward to his treatment of World War II. I haven't seen the prologue yet or listened to it, but I believe it's from the perspective of Germany. Not like they're good people or anything, but they are human beings and they had motives and reasons. And I'm fascinated to see what that looks like with a bunch of diligent research. And I think he's right. I mean, there are obviously more off ramps than people understand about how to prevent the Holocaust. If all the belligerents were wiser, it obviously could have stopped. Didn't have to happen, and it's not just Hitler's fault.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to that as well. By the way, I should just mention, so Daryl Cooper is the Martyr Made podcast, and he had a really good. Do you remember, Adam, the name of the Israel Palestine?
Yeah, it's called Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem.
Yeah. And what's interesting about is people who come to know Daryl, and especially like if you're introduced to him via the Babylon Bee guys or something, or James Lindsay at this point, unfortunately, like you would just think, oh yeah, it's because he's just a seething Jew hater and that's his. And no, that series, it starts out with a harrowing account of, like, if you were a Jewish person and all of a sudden all your neighbors just went nuts and hunted you down in a pogrom. And then, it's like, ugh, and you're really making it visceral and feeling real. Like this, yeah. To understand, the motivation for why Zionism came to be. And
he created a continent-wide, multi-generational, very visceral impetus for why the Jewish people would want a homeland and want to be Zionists, especially in the day and age where the globe still considered colonialism kind of normal. You know, now we think it's a unique evil and, you know, an oppressive. But back then, when they were contemplating this, it was 1890 something or other. And it was just, yeah, of course we can go anywhere we want in the world and bring, you know, we'll make these primitive people better by our presence if they're even there. It just wasn't even thought of as a problem. Of course we can go colonize a place and just make it a safe homeland for the Jewish people. And he presents that case very, very well.
Yeah, it's like I think the mark of good fiction, and my oldest son is, you know, trying to write a novel and what, and I'm getting, and my big thing was, don't set your characters up to mock them. Like, you know, have every character thinks he's the star of the story, and, you know, has his motivations, and it might not be true that everyone thinks he's the good guy. Like, there might be some people that think that's silly, or, well, I gotta pretend to do this because these idiots out there with their silly morality that their, you know, parents taught them or whatever. But still, you know, everyone's got their motivation, and that's what, and, you know, Cooper is not judging anybody in the narrative. He's just trying to explain to you, this is what happened, and here's why every interested party did what they did. And, you know, you can just say, oh, okay, now I understand why that happened, even though that's kind of a crazy outcome.
Yeah, I don't want to turn this into just a love letter for Martyr Maid, but on his website there for free, he's got a great series talking about Nietzsche and Dostoevsky. That's just fascinating. He's got a great one on the history of the civil rights movement and how it led into the Jonestown Massacre, which is just way more informative about what the 50s and 60s were like than I ever expected from just a story about drinking the Kool-Aid. He does really good work. They're very interesting. They're very informative. You always learn something. And yeah, go check out martyrmaid.com. Maybe we'll put a link in the show notes to exactly how you find Martyr Maid and all this stuff.
And the first one I listened to from him was where I learned about the Barr novel about the sex alien rapist, the Epstein stuff.
Look at that, a hyperlink to a previous crossover show.
There you go.
Well done, Dr. Murphy.
Thank you. So speaking of getting to everyone's head and seeing how things happen and its crazy outcome, that's my last bit on the, you know, the philosophical, would you go back in time and kill baby Hitler if you couldn't? It's just funny now as not just a Christian, but flirting with Calvinism. Like, to me, like, of course I would. Like, it's just, why would I do it? Because it's, you know, everything in my current understanding is, it's like a mix of absolute precise determinism, but married with free will. And that the position would be Molinism, if people know what that is. I won't get into that tangent now here, but my point is just, like, when you say, well, why does God allow this bad thing to happen? And say, okay, well, what would you change? And it's not like you have to say, well, wait, but there's molecules, like the state of the universe, you know, 10 minutes before what you think shouldn't have happened was such and such. The laws of physics would have to be different for it not to turn into what you said. So what would you change? You know, what laws, if you don't like F equals MA? You get what I'm saying? And it would be like, I think you would realize you can't just tweak one. It's sort of like analogous to, oh, wow, there should be, you know, more housing for poor people. Okay, well, I'm going to go tweak this. And then that starts having a cascade of, so that's kind of what I think that, you know, given my views, that when you die and then you confront God and maybe some people are going to be wagging their figure, like, why did you let all this? And he could just start showing you, whoa, that is gorgeous. That's why you did that. That's what I think it would be like. So, and so in that context, then, just go back in time and say, I mean, for all you know, more people would die. You know, you're going to drown baby Hitler, and then maybe some other tyrant rises in his place who's even worse, and then more people die, right? So that's what I'm saying. You don't know the future. Maybe the most awful things haven't even happened yet.
Right.
You know, why do we think that the stuff that happened between those 5 years is the worst thing that's ever going to happen in human history? And that's, you know what I mean?
And I think that's why the important thing to focus on is not how you're necessarily going to change the future in this tortured example, but whether or not you think killing innocents is a good idea.
Right.
And since we're just spitballing, I'll try to underscore it with a couple other thought experiments we've all heard about. The trolley problem, where you're just an innocent person standing around and you see that some maniac has devised a trolley that's going to, it's set right as it is to run over 5 people and kill them, but you could hit a switch and derail it such that it goes to a different path and kills one innocent person. Would you hit the switch? And when people think they have an answer for that, I like to say, well, what about if you're standing on top of a bridge over the trolley? It's a little bit different. Trolley is moving along and it's going to hit 5 people, but you happen to be standing next to a super fat guy. And if you just chuck him, off the bridge onto the tracks, it will stop the trolley and save those 5 people. Are you happy? I mean, not happy, but would you choose to kill that guy, that fat guy? Or how about the doctor, the similar versions, exact same scenario, but the doctor is what if you were a surgeon and you could save the lives of 5 people who were dying with various organ ailments by harvesting the organs from a very healthy, unwilling, donor, not donor. Would you be willing to kill that guy in order to save 5 people who for sure would die otherwise? And I answer all of those the same. No, I'm not willing to kill anybody.
Oh, I thought you were going to say whatever one gave you the most money.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, this is a podcast, but just between you and me, Bob. No, I mean, we're set in these torturous situations. And again, assuming I don't have a loved one involved where I can make a selfish determination like that, I'd rather not put myself in a situation where I'm the person killing somebody. And I translate that to the baby Hitler time travel thing. And, that's without getting into the goofy time travel aspect of it. I just don't think, again, you buy that kid's paintings a couple of times or that youth.
Yeah. Okay. So I agree with you. And I also had thought about the trolley stuff too. That's good. The pushing the guy, I suppose in fairness, somebody could say, well, no, the doctor killing the person I think we do have this idea of there's a qualitative difference between someone dying, quote, of natural causes versus a human murdering them. So if you kill the guy on the table in order to harvest his organs and then save 5 other people, you're not preventing 5 homicides. And so that, whereas with the trolley thing, with the
but
evil,
you could construct, I mean, you can always construct these things such that it's the same.
Sure. But I'm just explaining the particular one there. I could see how somebody would say that's, but I like you're pushing the fat guy off. That one's great because, I think a lot of people would be tempted to say, I'd pull the switch to divert the trolley to hit the one guy instead of 5.
Seems less murdery,
but
right?
you pushing the guy. And I guess even there, they would say, because it's the original villain. Well, that's interesting though. If the 5 people are tied up and the villain tied up the other person and put him on the other track, then it seems like
the original villain killed 5 people. It's your choice to come along and kill 1.
Right. Well, yes, but still, I can understand someone initially thinking, well, no, if the situation is the 5 are tied up by the same villain and the other's tied by the same villain, he decided people are going to die, and I'm just choosing, how to direct it to minimize the impact.
It's true.
Whereas then it gets trickier. Well, what if a different villain tied up the other person? Then it's like, wait a minute, that's a little bit weird. And then, like you said, what if it's just some random guy happens to be crossing the track? He's not tied up. And then you do it, that is kind of like you're pushing the fat guy thing.
All those guys are equally innocent. And
so it's interesting.
Yeah.
Why the people's intuitions falter.
My views changed. I mean, I think when I was younger, I probably answered it, 5 is more than 1, so I'll hit the switch. But I don't think that anymore. I think I did not create the structure of this universe. The best I can do is not do evil myself.
Right, exactly.
And so I think there's lessons to be learned there, or maybe I'm just wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, and you could have, I think, like a Ludwig von Mises or Henry Hazlitt, who were in some loose, broad sense, consequentialists. I think they called themselves utilitarians, but in terms of the philosophical tradition, I think a lot of people would say, well, at the very weakest, or they're act utilitarians or something. But in any event, I think they would just say you can't forecast. That's why you can't do that. It's like with the Tom Cruise movie with the future crime stuff, that at the very least you could say, well, the reason you can't do that, as the movie demonstrated, is because maybe they're wrong. You know what I mean? So you wouldn't want to give any government that power to punish people before they actually did a crime, because that could be abused so much, or even honest or earnestly applied incorrectly. So that's one reason. But also, just in general, if my kid needs a medical treatment, would I go murder somebody else? Like, no. You know what I mean? Like it's so if you can't do that, then you can see so that's why, even if I could go back in time, and if I knew if I kill Hitler as a kid, these other people don't die, it's like you can't do that. You can't kill innocent people. Like, end of story. And so there. Did you ever see Adam? It was the hilarious thing. It was on Facebook. I saw it back when I used to go on Facebook. That this dad is showing the kid's probably 2. And he's going, here, I got, Timmy, and I set up the trolley prop, and he had like Thomas the Tank Engine or something, tracks. And he had, the people like the superheroes or something tied up, and they were 5 on one and 1 on the other. And I said, now, Tommy, what would you do? And he picked the train and he smashed the 5 people and went, bah! So that was Tommy's solution. So,
I mean, he had a point. It went
Yeah.
Good stuff. You got any more? Got any more nuggets of wisdom for us, Bob?
I think I'm good.
Yeah.
So don't kill babies, folks.
And if you do, use a very anthropomorphic toy engine, train engine, and go bah. All right, this was a good one. It went all over the place, but I thought it was informative.
Can you just imagine poor Mrs. Hitler goes into the bathroom and sees some guy with strange garb on, and he does that, and he goes, bah, and he jumps into a machine and disappears.
I know for certain she would have been prosecuted by the good German authorities for child murder. All right, I think we'll wrap there. We've riffed long enough. Thank you very much, Bob. This was great.
And for the 3 of you still listening, we appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. Go check out, if you haven't already, thebobmurphyshow.com and Heyman Nature on YouTube and heymannature.substack.com. Both Bob and I do extra stuff over there when we're not crossing each other over. Thank you much, Dr. Murphy, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.